So next I want to go through some other ways to make amines. And these are through what's called reductive amination. But we have to start by recalling some of the various oxidation states of nitrogen-containing functional groups that we've seen this semester. One of which is a nitrile, and that's in the +3 oxidation state, or that is a derivative of a carboxylic acid. The next one is an enamine, where we have an alkene that's in conjugation with an amine. And if you have trouble seeing that this is +2, then you can simply draw a resonance form, where this lone pair donates down, and you can show a nucleophilic lone pair on the alpha carbon. So now we can see that there's double bond character between C and N, or there are two bonds to that electronegative nitrogen. The next one we have here is a tertiary amide. And that carbon has two bonds to oxygen and one to nitrogen, or it's +3. A CN double bond is an imine, where there are two bonds to nitrogen, or +2. And finally, the last compound here is a tertiary amine, where there's one bond to nitrogen.